Colombian teachers begin a 48-hour strike to demand protection from the mounting violence. South Africa's president hits out against the country's last apartheid-era leader. And carnival events ramp up in Brazil as Rio's samba schools put social justice at the center of their performances. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez in Quito, and this is from the South. Teachers in Colombia have begun a 48-hour strike to protest at the threats and attacks suffered by many of their colleagues. Their union is demanding that the government of Iván Duque provides guarantees for teachers, a number of whom have been murdered as part of the paramilitary campaign against social and community leaders. Our correspondent, Hernán Tovar, was at the teachers' protest in Bogotá.
About 350,000 teachers have stopped work in protest at the increasing violence in the country, which has affected them directly. There have been teachers murdered, threatened, and forced to leave their communities. To understand more about the situation that teachers are now facing in Colombia, let's talk to Nelson Alarcón, who is the president of the teachers' union, FECOD. What is the reason for you to call this strike exactly?
Threats, attacks and murders of teachers are on the increase in Colombia, especially those who are leaders and activists in our trade union. So we are demanding that the government really implement effective policies to provide security and protection for all of us.
And how many teachers have been murdered so far this year?
Just this year, 2 teachers have been murdered, and more than 240 have received threats across the country.
So that gives you an idea of the situation for teachers in Colombia today. Teachers are now protesting here in Bogotá and in many other towns and cities around Colombia. Here, the protesters will be marching to the Ministry of Labor to demand these guarantees for teachers in the face of the violence from armed paramilitary groups.
Hernán Tovar from Colombia. Venezuela's Attorney General Tarek William Saab says the authorities have made their largest seizure of drugs in the last 6 months. He said 482 kilograms of cocaine were found on board of an unauthorized flight arriving from Colombia.
Investigations have revealed that the cargo's destination would have been Portugal. It would have been transported to Lisbon on board a flight of the Portuguese airline, TAP. I want to point out that Benedetto Canyemi Miranda is likely to be the coordinator of this network, which has allegedly been sending drugs to Portugal twice a week. Therefore, we call on the Portuguese authorities to investigate the matter and find those at the Lisbon airport who are complicit in this operation. Because there must be internal connections at the airport for them to be able to ship drugs twice a week without being detected or arrested until now.
Venezuela is moving towards a new electoral authority as part of the dialogue with sectors of the opposition. The National Assembly Committee that will appoint the new members of the National Electoral Council, or CNE, has been meeting in Caracas to plan next steps. The selection of a new CNE to oversee this year's parliamentary elections was one of the most important early agreements to come out of the dialogue. We bring you now the third part in our series called Failure of an Invasion. On this occasion, we'll look at opposition lawmaker in Venezuela, Juan Guaidó, and his self-proclamation as president, and how it set the tone for an invasion that was later defeated by the armed forces and the people.
On January 23, 2019, a new phase of the aggression drawn up by the United States government began. They were preparing for an invasion, which would be attempted 1 month later on February 23rd.
As President of the National Assembly, I hereby take over all the responsibilities of the executive power and assume the role of President in charge in Venezuela in order to bring an end to the usurpation, create a transitional government, and hold free elections.
All these people used an important day for Venezuelans when they commemorate how they had defeated a dictatorship, and these people used this date to act undemocratically.
Reactions quickly poured in following Guaido's declaration.
This is a joke for us. President is Nicolás Maduro Moros.
Long life Nicolás Maduro.
The president can be just anyone. They need to earn it. It's a person who fights for the people and is constantly surrounded by the people.
We voted for a president. We're not going to let anyone impose an illegitimate president like this Guaido guy, who nobody has heard of before. Who voted for Mr. Guaido?
From the moment Guaidó raised his hand and took an oath, we were dealing with a parliamentary coup, or rather, an attempted parliamentary coup.
Es una violación flagrante del Estado de Derecho en Venezuela.
It's a flagrant violation of the rule of law in Venezuela. I would like to ask all those people who have criticized President Maduro that which part of the Geneva Convention or the United Nations Charter or any convention allows such madness. Recognizing someone without legitimacy, who wasn't even a candidate nor chosen, it's absurd.
A todas luces, a las luces del derecho.
It was an outrageous act that goes completely against international law and our constitution. It's really extraordinary to have someone proclaim himself president when we have the rule of law, institutions, and a legitimate president elected by the people.
No one in Venezuela can do this, even if they are well known, young and willing to take a risk, which was the case of Juan Guaidó. It's not about a person, but a simple fact that no one can become president if they weren't elected. Guaidó was never a candidate and never participated in a presidential election.
Guaidó nunca participó como candidato presidencial en ninguna elección.
Fue el inicio del fracaso.
It was the beginning of the end of this absurd strategy by the Venezuelan opposition, which is afraid of elections.
Ya las cartas estaban echadas.
The cards were laid on the table. That man, the puppet of the United States, was put there to violate our constitution, to try to tempt the armed forces into rebelling and turning their backs on President Maduro.
A violar nuestra constitución, a ser llamados.
And the cards were indeed laid on the table. The United States was no longer standing in the shadows. It was now openly attacking Venezuela. Donald Trump said all options are on the table.
We'll see. We'll see. All options are open. Just so you understand, all options are open. Go ahead.
Vamos a trabajar ya ayuda humanitaria.
We started working on delivering humanitarian aid, creating an international coalition through neighboring countries and the international community to be able to enter Venezuela and give President Guaidó the aid, medicine and food so they can begin the work inside the country.
Para empezar a trabajar con la crisis humanitaria que existe dentro de Venezuela.
Desmonetizamos su moneda.
We took away the value of their money through the international banking system. Then we go and tell them, look how bad the government of Venezuela is. Their currency is not worth anything. But the government didn't do that. We did it. We said, look, they can't even feed their people. But that's because we've cut all their income.
The people of Venezuela began to prepare for February 23rd with military exercises, coming up with the strategy of a resistance along with the Bolivarian Army, the Civic Military Union. The attacks by the United States were centered on the Bolivarian National Armed Forces, but were unable to fracture them, despite psychological manipulation tactics. In our next report, we'll look at how the military prepared for February 23rd under a new defense strategy, which included the civilian militias.
We'll take a short break. When we come back, an indigenous leader in Ecuador denounces persecution by the government. Welcome back. More news at this hour. Ecuador's Attorney General has concluded the preliminary hearings into a case of alleged corruption against the former president Rafael Correa. Correa's lawyers say it is another example of political persecution. Our correspondent Denise Herrera has more.
The National Court of Justice in Quito has completed these first hearings in the so-called Sobornos case. The Attorney General, Diana Salazar, said all the documents needed for the trial had been presented, and according to her, this will prove the existence of the crime of corruption, which she says was directed by former President Rafael Correa, as part of a criminal organization inside his government, which allegedly received money in exchange for contracts with the state. Salazar presented documents and copies of contracts signed by national and international companies. She gave time for the defense lawyers for the 21 people accused to review the documents and prepare their appeal. But these lawyers have said they are not being given long enough time, since it took the Attorney General 3 hours to present the documents, and have asked for more time to review the files. The Attorney General said that at the beginning she wanted to hear the testimony of 160 people, but she only heard the testimony of 31. The defense lawyers have also complained about this, as has Rafael Correa himself. He said it showed that this was a case of political persecution, since it only took the Attorney General 7 days to present her case.
That was Denise Herrera from Quito. And the president of Ecuador's main indigenous organization, CONAIE, is also denouncing the political persecution of indigenous leaders. Jaime Vargas and 2 other leaders of CONAIE were detained in Guatemala last week.
The National Confederation of Ecuadorian Indigenous Nationalities, known as CONAIE, has condemned the political persecution of their leaders. They say that they're not only persecuted within their own country, but also internationally. This arose as a result of the detentions of different leaders of CONAIE in Guatemala. The president of CONAIE detailed what had been said by the Guatemalan president.
The president of Guatemala ordered the detention of Ecuadorian citizens for doing political work. That is how the media explain it, the expulsion of the citizens. The Ecuadorian authorities asked for them to be returned because they have pending causes.
Ecuador's Minister of Government, Maria Paula Romo, denied that the government had requested the expulsion of the leaders, varying from what the Guatemalan authorities had said to CONAIE. They say that what's being said is contradictory and that what's taken place is an example of the persecution of indigenous leaders around the region.
There is persecution not only at the national level, but it became an international persecution, and that shows the inconsistencies in what the governments of Guatemala and Ecuador have said. We are open to any investigation, and in addition we make a call for justice to the government, and we ask why they aren't holding any investigations regarding the deaths of our colleagues during the month of October.
The CONAIE has said that the illegal expulsion of their leader in Guatemala was in the midst of the recent visit of President Lenín Moreno to the United States. Analysts say that the Ecuadorian government has used the president's travel to Washington to distract from the general issues, one of them being the human rights violations in Ecuador.
It is very hard to remember a government that has had so many warning calls about the human rights violations and such serious ones, and that has been erased with the visit to see Trump. It has helped us forget that this is a government in which the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights has put issues several reports on the seriousness of the human rights situation in Ecuador.
With the argument that the national strike in October of 2019 was an attempt to destabilize the government, the previous events have served as justification by the executive for the arbitrary detentions of the leaders of the citizens' revolution. The October strike was also used to justify legal processes against leaders, intimidation, and to minimize the stories of the victims. On top of this, there have been attacks to the Ombudsman of Ecuador, who has publicly denounced death threats against him and his family. Many months later, the government of Lenín Moreno refuses to address the issues.
In other news, carnival events are underway around Brazil, and this year's samba bands are expected to celebrate with a particular social justice theme twist. Brian Meir has more from Copacabana Beach in Rio.
Carnival is about to kick off here in Rio de Janeiro, and this year is going to prove to be one of the most politicized carnivals in the history of the city. Now, historically, The street bloc parties have a lot of political satire and criticism, but the main event, which takes place in the Sapucaí Stadium in downtown Rio de Janeiro, the main samba parades haven't been that political because they depend on money from the city and state governments to pay for their lavish floats and things like that. But the political situation has deteriorated so much in Brazil since the 2016 coup. It's become impossible for these favela-based samba groups to avoid talking about politics. And one of the biggest controversies this year is being promised by Mangueira, one of the oldest and most traditional groups in the city. They're going to pay tribute during their carnival parade to a black Jesus Christ who comes from a favela, who fights against oppression and fights against authoritarianism. Now, this has drawn the ire of all kinds of right-wing evangelical Christian and Catholic groups in Brazil. They're trying to spread fake news through the social media, accusing Mangueira of celebrating a drug trafficking Christ, which is a lie. And other big samba groups are also making a lot of protests. Portela, which is one of the most traditional groups in Rio de Janeiro, is going to pay tribute to the Tupinambá indigenous tribe, which was the first tribe that was here before the colonists arrived in the 1500s, under the theme of no captain, no bishop. Now, when they say no captain, they're referring to former army captain, far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. And when they refer to a bishop, they're referring to the Mayor Crivella, who's a bishop in the evangelical Universal Kingdom of God Church. The song is about how the indigenous people should not have to bow to any authority figure, any captain, any bishop. And these are just 2 of 10 political parades that are going to take place on Saturday and Sunday night here in Rio de Janeiro for a television audience estimated of above 30 million. It's going to be a major act of rebellion against rising fascism in Brazil.
That was Brian Mir from Brazil, and we'll sure bring you those festivals as well. After this last break, Iranians prepare to vote for a new parliament. So stay with us. Thank you for joining us again. Lesotho's Prime Minister Thomas Thabane is to be charged with the murder of his estranged wife, according to the police. Yielding to pressure from his party, Thabane said he would resign by the end of July. But the 80-year-old leader made no mention of the murder charges.
Today I wish to reiterate my announcement to retire from office. I might still have the necessary resilient fervor to continue serving my people and country, but the truth is that at my age I've lost most of my energy. I'm not as energetic as I used to be a few years ago. My fellow countrymen and women, it is very unfortunate that some have deliberately decided to distort my decision to retire, either motivated by hate or for political gain. I appeal to all Basotho not to intentionally misconstrue my announcement to retire from office.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has hit out against remarks made by the country's last apartheid-era leader, Frederick de Klerk. Answering questions in Parliament, the President said apartheid was unquestionably a crime against humanity. During last week's State of the Nation address, the opposition economic freedom fighters protested at the presence of de Klerk, who had denied the system of racial segregation had been a crime against humanity.
But just as importantly, so apartheid was so immoral in its conception and so devastating in its execution that there is no South African living today who is not touched by its legacy. I would even go on to say that to deny this, in my view, is treasonous.
Hundreds of Zimbabweans protested in the capital Harare on Wednesday against deteriorating living conditions. Protesters marched across the main streets of the city, calling on the government to find solutions to the rising cost of living. Due to high inflation rates, Zimbabwean citizens have been struggling to afford basic services. The situation has been worsened by droughts, which affected the country in the past 3 years. Now to the United States. The Democratic Party held a 2-hour-long debate in which 6 candidates defended their bid to challenge President Donald Trump for the upcoming elections. Among the topics discussed was healthcare, to which Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders said that the government has failed citizens by maintaining expensive medical costs while enriching multi-million-dollar companies.
UK can do it, France can do it, Germany can do it, all of Europe can do it. Gee whiz, somehow or another, we are the only major country on earth that can't do it. Why is that? And I'll tell you why. It's because last year the healthcare industry made $100 billion in profits. Pharmaceutical industry, top 6 companies, $69 billion in profit. And those CEOs are contributing to Pete's campaign and other campaigns up here.
To other news now, the Portuguese parliament has passed a bill allowing euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide for terminally ill people. The landmark vote means Portugal is set to become one of the few countries in the world permitting euthanasia. The country's president could still attempt to block the legislation, but Parliament can override his veto by voting a second time for approval. Though the bill was approved by a comfortable margin, hundreds of people outside the Parliament building, protested this measure. And Iran goes to the polls this Friday for parliamentary elections. The country's economic problems will be a top concern for voters, and particularly for young people.
Everyday difficulties and university fees forced Hussein to work more than half his day on his motorcycle. Like many other young people here, he's hoping for a parliament that will make a real difference to the lives of young Iranians.
Look how I work from early morning till afternoon to save a little money. I ask the members of the parliament to tackle the economic situation in the country and take the right decisions. Because the current economic situation is not good for anyone, everyone, whether rich or poor, is under pressure.
Official statistics show that unemployment in Iran is running at 10.5%, a rate that some young people attribute to the government's failure to create jobs for young people. This could affect how the young vote and lead them to choose younger candidates who haven't been in parliament before.
We have to find a way to get more young people into parliament, because they make up a large percentage of society and they understand the problems people face, so they will work to solve them.
Most older Iranians do not share many of the opinions and preferences of the youth, but they are united in their social and economic demands, and they too hope to see the arrival of a parliament whose members are truly capable of overcoming the obstacles that still stand in the way of development.
And with that story, we end our news brief. But you can find all of our stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And be sure to also join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.